Canadian authorities busted a human smuggling ring, which they say illegally brought hundreds of migrants into the U.S. from the area around Cornwall, Ontario, right across from Massena, New York. It's our top story tonight with Garrett Domblewski.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police says 4 people have been arrested and 4 other suspects have arrest warrants out for what the RCMP calls a large-scale human smuggling ring, which organizers profited from.
4 people from Akwesasne were charged along with 4 others from Quebec and Ontario. RCMP says between July 2022 and June 2023, the group allegedly smuggled hundreds of desperate migrants through communities along the St. Lawrence River and into the United States. It says migrants were charged thousands of dollars by the smugglers and were brought into the country in dangerous nighttime crossings that were sometimes deadly. You may remember in March of 2023 when the bodies of 8 people were found in the St. Lawrence River on the Quebec side of Akwesasne. The victims were from 2 families, one Indian and one Romanian. They had reportedly been trying to enter the U.S. illegally. And while that case fits the timeline and location of where the alleged smuggling ring was operating, there is no confirmation that they are related. Following the arrests announced Thursday, an inspector with RCMP said in a statement, quote, "Many people from all over the world come to North America desperately seeking a better life. Transnational criminal networks are exploiting that desperation to profit from these men, women, and families with no concern for their welfare."
Massena Mayor Greg Paquin says alleged smuggling like this remains largely silent in the community because he feels that after people enter the U.S. illegally, they want to get away from the border and federal agents quickly. Garrett Domblewski, 7 News.